Welcome to the Dog Nation Happy Hour, presented by Marlowe's Tavern. A fun and laid-back look at everything happening around the Georgia Bulldogs and the latest UGA recruiting news there as well. Make sure you stop by the local Marlowe's Tavern right there in your neighborhood and enjoy Happy Hour every weekday from 4 to 6 p.m. And now, for Dog Nation Happy Hour, here's your host, Kaylee Mansell.
Hello, Dog Nation, and welcome to yet another episode of the Happy Hour brought to you by our friends at Marlowe's Tavern. As always, you guessed it, I am your self-proclaimed Happy Hour expert, Kaylee Mansell, and I'm bringing on some guys tonight who have been on a Happy Hour hiatus. I'm going to let you have a second, take your guesses. Of course, it's none other than Connor Riley and Brandon Adams. So excited to have them on today. We're going to start this week with the question of the week, and this question was actually inspired by Jeff Santel. I felt like I should probably wait till we had Jeff on again to ask this question, but he went ahead and answered it last night. So since he already has, look, guys, we're going to Vandy this weekend. That's only a little drive away for a lot of our fans that live here in Georgia. It's only a couple hours. So within road trips like that, you got to make your gas station stop. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and bring you guys on, and I want you guys to give me what is your go-to gas station road trip snack grabs. I'm going to let Brandon start with this one.
So I'm going to take the easiest one first. I mean, obviously, it begins and it ends with the sliced brisket sandwich from Buc-ee's. When it comes to like a lot of the other sort of gas station style food, try to be careful with that. My constitution is a little bit more delicate than it used to be. I don't know that I'm going to, succeed with a lot of gas station food, but the sliced brisket sandwich, that's real food. I mean, I give Buc-ee's all the credit in the world. That's real food. It's a good time. So if this is a draft, that's my number one overall draft selection.
Yeah, I think, again, I don't want to give away any free plugs here, free advertising, but I think Brandon absolutely nails it there with the number one overall pick. For me, pepperoni pizza combos are sort of my go-to. Like if I just need something to give me some energy, those get me going. Maybe some yogurt covered pretzels there as well. But Brandon, I think said everything that needed to be said about the number one overall selection there.
And I guess you go right by the Buc-ee's in Calhoun on your way to Nashville, if that's what Georgia fans are planning on doing here this weekend.
And it doesn't matter if you're coming from South Georgia, the Buc-ee's advertisements start like 300 miles out. You really can't miss it because every mile, you're getting a little bit closer. For me, I kind of thought that Brandon might say this. I always have to have a Dr. Pepper on a road trip. Yeah. I mean, you missed the mark there, buddy. You really did. And then yeah, Dr. Pepper on a road trip is so much better. And I feel the same way about my snack pick, which is and I would never even buy these for my home, but something about picking them up from the gas station, having them on the road, especially when I'm not driving. And maybe it's because I'm still a 10-year-old at heart, but it's Cheeto Puffs. Dr. Pepper and Cheeto Puffs. Those are the two things that I pick up. And then in the summertime, when it's a little bit warmer, if they have it, because they're elite, chocolate Dippin' Dots. But
so it goes without saying, I'm like chain drinking Dr. Pepper one right after the other the entire time I'm road tripping anyway. That goes without saying. But I'm going to call an absolute foul here on the idea of we call them Cheeto Puffs. They taste good, but I can't be driving down the road with that orange stuff all over my fingers. That's a disaster.
I don't drive on long road trips. Normally it's somebody else.
No, she lets someone else do all the work. How lovely that must be.
Look,
I can't have a car ride with orange hands the entire time.
I will say, of the Dog Nation road trippers out there, BA is absolutely the driver. Look, not a speeder, but that's actually preferred in some instances. And I've been on enough long road trips with him where he's going to get us there in a reasonable amount of time. I'm not going to have to worry about pulling over. Or anything along the lines of that. He is an A+ driver who I think we share sort of the same mindset on road trips of we're just trying to get there. We have to make a certain stop for food. That's fine. We'll be amendable. And then we get going.
I take that as a huge compliment. I really appreciate that. And I feel the same way.
I'm glad we established this because I should just go ahead and let y'all know now that you never want to drive and you never want to be in my passenger seat. Not because I'm a bad driver, but because I'm too good of a driver. I'm always going the speed limit. I'm not getting pulled over. So I'm in the right lane. So
Kaylee, your dad's maybe not watching right now. You actually don't have to say that. He might not be watching. Now, he may be, but he might not be.
He's probably the reason that I drive the way that I do because I hated having to drive with my dad when I was 15. And I will share, he knows that. I will say that to his face. He was the absolute worst. And like, I would take my mom in driving instances. And let me just tell y'all, that is saying a lot. She's not another great person to be in the car with. So they're probably the reason that I drive so safely now, because they had me panicked in the car before we even got like a mile down the road. All right. So we're going to shift gears here. Shift gears, no intended, but that was perfect timing. So we'll talk about something else before we get to Georgia football. Braves are going on right now, down 2-1. There's been some drama within this series. I mean, that is to be expected considering the opponent, but we're looking at odds here, and I'm thinking, okay, who has a better chance of pulling it out? Does the Braves have a better chance of winning out this series, or does Alabama have a better chance of winning the SEC West? I know those two don't have a correlation to one another, but it was a conversation between my friend and I, so I want to know what y'all think. Brandon, I'll start with you.
I think it's a great question. I think it's really interesting. And unfortunately, at this point in time, I'd have to say I believe the answer is probably Alabama. Now, I haven't given up on the Braves yet. I think that Spencer Strider, obviously, as folks are seeing this show, that game will be getting ready to get started. I think that Strider has a real chance to change the momentum in the series. Like the old cliche says, a lot that feels like it's going right for Philadelphia, that can change if you get the big start from Strider. I obviously hope that it comes. Right now, Bama's undefeated in the SEC. They got the inside track here right now. If you told me which thing is more likely to happen with the Braves facing only one more loss and the series being over, I think I'd probably put the nod in the direction of Alabama a bit. It seems unlikely they would lose, although I guess with Jaden Daniels still out there, the chance of something crazy happening in the SEC West getting thrown back into turmoil at some point in time is at least a possibility. But begrudgingly, I have to admit that I believe the answer is probably Alabama winning the West is the more likely outcome here.
Connor, do you agree with that?
I do, and it has nothing to do at all with Alabama. The whole Orlando Arcia, attaboy Bryce Harper situation, every single way the Braves have handled that gives off the vibes that this is a soft team to me. It is extremely concerning that Arcia would, just try and say that behind closed doors, that they would get upset that they said it in a locker room in which open reporters were there. And then some of the post-game comments that came out last night, like you taunted Bryce Harper. Bryce Harper has proven to be a great postseason player. He now holds the Major League Baseball record for most home runs hit in a divisionals in division series history, passing what Chipper Jones had previously done. Like, yeah, he made a base running mistake, and he was always going to probably come out and correct that the next game. And so to just the way the Braves have gone about handling everything since that has just been really concerning to me. And while I agree with Brandon's point about Spencer Strider and him being, a dominant pitcher, I thought he gave you a pretty dominant outing in game one, and the Braves were just unable to do anything with that. So, again, maybe the offense turns it on. Maybe they start playing better. But everything I've seen out of the Braves, literally since Bryce Harper got doubled off at the end of game two, has just been very concerning to me.
And I'll say this real quick, Kaylee. In sports, I don't think there's anything wrong with not everybody has to like everybody, right? Kirby Smart starts every press conference. I got a lot of respect for so-and-so. Well, that clearly works well for him. But in real life, when it comes to sports, not everybody respects everybody, right? And the Braves behind closed doors, not liking Bryce Harper, there's nothing wrong with that. That's not a scandal. The fact that winning that game on game two was a fun win, and the fact that Harper's error or his, mental error, contributed to the win, made it all the sweeter. There's nothing wrong with that. That's the way that sports sort of functions. The Phillies don't like the Braves. The Braves don't like the Phillies. I don't think either side necessarily has to apologize for that. So the Braves were energized by the blunder by Harper. The Phillies were energized by the fact that the Braves celebrated. It's just sort of the way that sports goes. I don't think that either side necessarily has to be backtracking from that. I didn't love some of the behavior from the Braves in the aftermath of that too. You don't have to excuse make over this as if it was some sort of scandal. It's not. You don't like Harper. They don't like you. Go out and play baseball. Just hit the ball better. And all of a sudden, no one's even talking about any of this anymore at all anyway.
Right. If the Braves don't score 2 runs last night, it's a very different conversation.
I agree. I don't think there's any reason to have to defend yourself in that kind of situation, especially because it was something that was said behind closed doors. It's not like as soon as the game was over, he went and shouted it out to all of Truist Park. So I really don't think anybody has a reason to defend themselves there, because at the end of the day, it's all a part of the game. And I was really 50-50 on my decision with this, because I want to say that the Braves have a better shot, but at the same time, like the 2 games that they lost weren't close. Nobody's bats are getting really hot right now, so it doesn't seem like there's a lot of momentum going their way. But then when you look at the other side, like Alabama still has some pretty tough games left. I know they have LSU. It's not the same Tennessee team that it was last year, but I think there's still a little bad blood between what happened in last year's game and then the Iron Bowl at the end. I mean, yeah, it's a first-year head coach for Auburn, but you never really know what's going to happen with that game. So I'm kind of excited to see how this plays out.
Well, can I ask you then, hey, Kaylee, before you change the subject, I don't mean to get you off track here, but can I ask both of y'all about the SEC West for a moment? Because one of two things is true. Either we're setting up for a huge clash in the SEC championship final. You're the division winners. Alabama on the one side, 11-1. Georgia, hopefully 12-0 with a spot at the playoffs up for grabs. Or Alabama is still not quite good enough to have a stranglehold on this division, and it is chaotic before it's all said and done. I mean, I wouldn't mind hearing another word or two about whether or not y'all think that there is still room for some chaos in the SEC West, or is this SEC championship all but locked up and we're only a few days away from the likely hype starting to build for this?
I think the entire SEC West is full of frauds, including Alabama there. I don't see a team on Alabama's schedule left that is going to beat them. LSU does not play defense. This Tennessee team, we'll learn a lot about them this weekend against A&M, but I think they're pretty clearly a different team away from home than they are at home based off of the Florida game we saw earlier this season. They've already played Ole Miss, and so I just don't see a team left on that schedule for Alabama that is going to beat them. Maybe LSU is able to score enough points and turn that game into a shootout, but I just think as a whole, the SEC is down this year. And while I do think that the most likely scenario is an unbeaten Georgia against an 11-1 Alabama in the SEC championship game, based on what I've seen from the rest of college football, I don't think the SEC is particularly strong this year.
Mm-hmm. I agree with Connor in the sense I don't think that there is anybody on the schedule that I'm 100% certain can beat Bama at this point. However, I do think that they're going to play a lot of close games. I think the LSU game will be close. I could see the Iron Bowl being close. I could even see Arkansas keeping it close. So they haven't really had, I mean, I guess Mississippi State in their first game of the year were the only like dominant wins that they've had. It's not the same Alabama that we've seen in the past. So I think they're going to play some really close games. I think they're going to continue to remain humbled in a lot of these situations. But I think at the end of the day, that's who Georgia faces in the SEC championship. And I think it's their first real beatdown of the year. So that's where I stand on that. But I will say, shifting to last weekend, we've talked about it all week. That's the moment that we've been waiting for. We've all been waiting on this game. We weren't really sure when it was going to come, but I don't think that Georgia's win over Kentucky could have come at a better time, because you go from a game like Kentucky to Vanderbilt, which is essentially a scrimmage, and then you have bye week. I feel like if we needed to establish our identity and where we're at as a team, it needed to be versus Kentucky. I'm so glad that we've had it. And it seems like now the conversation that we keep having is, does Georgia really deserve the number one spot? Are we the number one team in the country? And I want to know from y'all's perspective, after the way that we've performed on Saturday, do y'all truly believe that we are the number one best team in the country? Work bias aside, are we the number one team now? Brandon.
Yeah, I think so. I do. And I think it's interesting to note how many of the national types who don't have the same affection for Georgia that I do seem to feel the same way. I think that there are kind of like the only argument that would possibly make sense for me against Georgia would be if you wanted to make a resume-based case for perhaps Florida State. Had Texas beaten Oklahoma, you certainly could have listened to that. Neutral against Oklahoma, road against Alabama, but obviously Texas lost that game. So I don't know how strong the resume argument is for somebody else. You know, Michigan from a week-to-week dominance standpoint probably enters the discussion, but there's no real one win for Michigan right now that I would say obviously propels them ahead of Georgia. They're essentially trying to do the Georgia style, the schedule they played, and that's a very back sort of loaded schedule for the Wolverines, I think. So the best of Michigan, we just really haven't seen one way or another. So, you know, Georgia hasn't really looked great until last week. But the story for the season has been the fact that no one has made an obvious case for themselves other than Georgia. I think Florida State's probably come the closest I could listen to a resume-based argument for Florida State. But now the Clemson win probably doesn't seem like it once did. And the LSU game probably has lost some of its luster there too. So for me, Connor, it just sort of comes down to there's no obvious argument for anybody else, I don't believe.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think if Texas had won last week, I think they probably would be the number one team in the country right now, but they found a way to lose that game. Washington, if they're able to get a win this weekend against Oregon, I think they might have a convincing case there. I think Georgia's going to be the number one team, in the conventional polls for a while now. But it would not surprise me in the slightest if when those first college football playoff rankings come out on Halloween, that the committee decides to rank the winner of the Penn State-Ohio State game, which will be played next week, as the number one team in the country. I think Penn State and Ohio State, by that point, whoever wins that game will have an impressive enough resume, along with how they've looked in other games to be ranked there. And look, we know enough about this committee now. They want to go contrarian. This is all a ratings ploy. They want to try and manufacture some drama there. But Georgia, look, from everything I've seen, they continue to look like the number one team in the country. And at the end of the day, this team ultimately isn't all that concerned about it. They know if they go out and take care of business and win the SEC, they're going to be in the college football playoff. And so long as they know that that's the end goal there, there's no point in rushing out and running a really great mile time at this point in the season, knowing they've got to peak towards the end of the year. Now, their schedule does get a bit tougher there in the second half of the season, especially starting in November. And I actually think if you do start getting into the resume game, I think if you're a Georgia fan, you probably want to start rooting for Ole Miss pretty hard here with these next couple of weeks, because I think that has a chance to be a top 10 game with the schedule that they have leading into that Georgia game there. And that'll give Georgia sort of the big feather in the cap going into potentially the SEC championship game with their resume there.
Can I give you, Kaylee, a rough draft on a sort of a take I've been workshopping here a little bit? So first playoff rankings come out October 31st.
Mm-hmm.
Typically, we would say, you don't care about being number one right now. You want to be number one at the end. What if this is true? What if after 2 months of the season, no one's been able to overtake Georgia for the top spot? Because Connor's right. The committee wants to be contrarian. If they could go against the human polls and put a different team other than Georgia at number one, they'd clearly like to. But if there isn't a convincing enough case so that they can, if Georgia's still number one in the committee's eyes after the first 2 months, then perhaps that's a little bit more significant than sometimes when Georgia's been ranked number one by the committee. And perhaps that's a little bit of a signal that it's starting to look a little easier for Georgia again this year, kind of like it has in the past. And perhaps, Georgia's going to march to something that feels a little bit more like 2022 did. I'm not fully attaching my name to that take as of yet, but I do have my eye on October 31st, because if no one has made a convincing enough case for themselves to be better than Georgia by then, I'm not sure what changes in that regard in the final month of the season either.
Well, I am glad that you gentlemen brought up the college football playoff, because now that we are almost halfway through the season, it's time to reevaluate our initial playoff predictions. I think that Brandon may have had Texas and LSU in his. Connor, I'm pretty sure you had Clemson in yours. So now that we're getting to that halfway point, I'm going to allow you to re-pick your playoff positions as of now, 1 through 4. We'll let Connor start. Give me your new updated playoff predictions. Go.
Yeah, so I will have Michigan as the number one team at the end of this season, because I think the committee is going to value an undefeated Big Ten team over an unbeaten SEC team there. And I think they're going to give them that number one spot, even with Michigan playing a relatively weak non-conference schedule. I think wins over Penn State and over Ohio State, which I expect Michigan to have, I think is going to very much help their case there. Number 2, I do have Georgia. I think they're going to win the rest of their games. And I think the reason that they fall to 2 is just because they happen to be a victim of what I believe is a down SEC this year. 3, I will go with Washington. I did have them in my original playoff picks. They have shown me nothing to dissuade me from the fact. Now, obviously, we're going to learn a lot about them this weekend. I don't know if there's a team in the Pac-12 that gets through undefeated, but I do believe that with the strength of that league, that a one-loss Pac-12 champion will absolutely get into the college football playoff there. And then for the number 4 spot, I think it's going to be Texas. I know they lost last week to Oklahoma. I think a lot of issues that you saw there from them in that game are correctable. I think those two teams are going to meet again at the end of the season in the Big 12 championship game. I think it's actually probably a good thing that Texas lost to Oklahoma there, because it allows them to sort of correct the things that they have to correct, as opposed to, say, losing to a TCU, losing to a Baylor, some other lesser Big 12 program that's going to hurt their resume a bit more. And obviously, I leave out Florida State there, and yes, they're undefeated. I just have not been all that impressed with this Florida State team from a week in, week out standpoint yet. And when you factor in that they don't necessarily have the blue chip ratio needed, to really compete there. I do think that, I don't know when it's going to happen. I think if Duke has Riley Leonard next week, that becomes a very interesting game. I just don't know when those losses are going to come to Florida State, but I do believe they will happen.
Yeah, and Kaylee, of my playoff. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, before we get to Brandon, I do want to ask Connor a follow-up question. So if things go as you say and Michigan ends up in that number 1 spot and they get to pick where they go, do you think that they would take the Sugar Bowl and go, because I guess it might be a little bit closer, I don't know, or do you think that they would go to Pasadena for the Rose Bowl?
This is just a guess, but I believe, one, Michigan has a national fan base and they're going to travel wherever that game is. So from a fan standpoint, I don't think it matters all that much. I do think that, if they could possibly avoid a Pac-12 team, that would probably help them. And now, if you're playing Texas, you probably want to play them out west in Pasadena. But I think ultimately, because of the Big Ten ties to the Rose Bowl there, I think that's going to want to encourage them to see that game there. So as it stands right now, I would have Michigan and Texas playing in the Rose Bowl rematch of, I believe, the 2004 Rose Bowl, a classic there. And then I would have Georgia and Washington playing in the Sugar Bowl.
Okay, Brandon, take it away.
Yeah, so of my 4 playoff teams, the only one I feel like I've gotten it obviously wrong about is LSU. I really thought the transfers LSU brought in on defense would make a bigger impact on that side of the ball, and it just has not happened. I still think LSU can be a sneaky, dangerous team. The one thing they cannot do, though, is they just can't stop anybody through the air right now. And so obviously you get it way wrong with them in terms of being a playoff level team because of how bad they are defensively. But I agree with what Connor said about Texas. I've had them in my playoff. They obviously lost this past Saturday, but my thought on Texas as a playoff team really hasn't changed at all. It's a good, hard-fought game, neutral site. Oklahoma just happened to win. We may see those same 2 teams play in another neutral site game, in the Big 12 title game. I certainly didn't see enough on Saturday to make me believe that Texas could not win a rematch, which I think leads to a pretty interesting discussion. Now, obviously, it takes a lot of football to get us to this point. But what if it's 11-1 Texas with a neutral site win against Oklahoma, and 11-1 Oklahoma with a neutral site win against Texas? Now, supposedly the committee is supposed to value conference championships as kind of a tiebreaker among even teams, but that seems like a pretty specious claim to say just because Texas won in a game that was labeled the Big 12 championship, if that were to indeed happen, that their neutral win against Oklahoma is more valuable than Oklahoma's neutral win against Texas. The point I'm getting to here is I don't think we should discount the possibility that the Big 12 in the final year of both Texas and Oklahoma, you could potentially see an argument for both Texas and Oklahoma in the playoff if things continue the way they are right now. My reason for feeling that way is obviously you like Georgia to make the playoff here right now. I also had Michigan to begin with. I still feel like the Wolverines are on track to do that. But Ohio State right now, this is a team that's struggling a little bit on offense. Penn State, I still don't quite know what to make of the Nittany Lions as they try to step up. I think the issue facing Florida State, Connor mentioned some vulnerabilities the Seminoles might have. Here's the other thing. The ACC is deeper than it's been. North Carolina's pretty good right now. Miami embarrassed itself last week, but they're still a pretty tough out. If Riley Leonard returns for Duke, that's not an easy team to beat either. That at some point in time, you just sort of feel like Florida State could be vulnerable to be tripped up by the fact that the ACC on par, at least the top half of the league, is probably playing a better brand of football. So I like Georgia to make it. I like Michigan to make it. I still like Texas to make it. And I would consider the long shot possibility that Oklahoma could join Texas as a second Big 12 team in the final year of both those teams in that league, who you have to at least consider as a possibility to make the playoff right now as well.
I think my initial 4 teams were Georgia, Ohio State, Florida State, and USC. I'm going to take back 2 of mine because, I thought USC was a logical pick because they might have the best quarterback in the country, pretty good coach, but they're just god-awful on defense. It is so – I watched the triple overtime performance. I stayed up. I watched the whole thing because I've kind of been – I don't want to say rooting for my playoff teams because that doesn't feel like the right word, but Mike Griffith told me one thing. He said, you always need to root for yourself. And so I root for myself so that my playoff predictions can remain perfect up until this point. And so I kind of been watching and keeping up with those teams. But, USC's just terrible. Go ahead, Brandon.
That is, first of all, very true. And also something that sounds like something that Mike would say. So,
well, I don't mean to – we had a conversation at Auburn, and I knew that Mike had kind of been and worked in a lot of areas where SEC schools were. He's covered a lot of different teams, been a beat writer for a lot of teams. So I asked him, I said, real talk, who do you root for? Like, at the end of the day, what team do you cheer for deep down? He said, I cheer for Mike Griffin. I root for myself. And that honestly might be one of the best pieces of advice anybody has ever given me, especially in a job in a field like we're in. You've got to root for yourself. And if the dogs are doing good, then business is good for us. So I totally understood what he was saying, but that's what I kind of mean when I say that I watch my USC games and my Florida State games and Ohio State games because I want to root for myself because I want my initial picks to be right. But if I had to turn back the clock, I would definitely put in Michigan over Ohio State. As you mentioned, they've been struggling on the offensive side. I just can't get behind Ryan Day, and I definitely think that Michigan is just the elite team in that rivalry now. I don't see them beating them. I could see them getting upset by Penn State, and then I'm going to take back my USC pick because they're horrible. I mean, it's pitiful to watch. It's like watching really good high school JV out there, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Kayla, you're young to this and you're new to this. You can't bail on your picks. You can't, unless if a team hasn't been eliminated yet, you can't waffle like that. That's poor form. You got to believe in your original self, your past self. And while sure.
So this is my show. So when Connor says anything that I don't like, I can take him off. And so we're going to put him in a 30-second timeout.
There you go.
Back on when he's ready.
I like that. You're like Tony Reali on what's that, around the horn or whatever. I like that.
I have the authority here. He dropped off the call too. So, oh my gosh, I guess we'll have Eddie come in as our third guest.
There
Eddie
you put him in a box.
Gators.
So I'll tell you this about making my picks, which is obviously I am a Georgia fan. I want Georgia to win. Therefore, I don't like Georgia's rivals.
Yeah.
But if all you ever did was say how good Georgia is and how bad the teams that Georgia fans hate are, eventually that would get boring after a while. You just sort of run out of things to say, right? Your opinions would be kind of dictated to you by, just the history of the rivalries. So this is where I think picks and things like that become pretty important because while, yes, I love Georgia and I want the teams that Georgia fans to hate, I want them to lose as much as possible. When it comes to making picks, there's just a little bit of ego that does take over. Hopefully you don't take yourself too seriously. Meaning me, hopefully I don't take myself too seriously, but you do want to get your picks right. And so therefore that's that little bit of a counterbalance to the idea of I'm predisposed to think that Florida's terrible and Auburn's terrible and all that kind of stuff. And yet when it comes to picking games, what do you really think is going to happen? And that kind of provides that little bit of counterbalance of, yeah, I hate the lousy stinking Gators, but if I think they're going to win, I need to say so because ultimately you kind of want to have that little bit of cachet of, you got to pick right for the small amount of bragging rights you do get if something like that occurs.
Mm-hmm. Well, speaking of picks, we have this great event coming up with Mark Rick next week. We are going to be bowling. I know some players are going to be out there. Some coaches are going to be out there. Brandon, just based off of sheer guess, what UGA football player do you think is the best bowler on the team?
So here's what I'm going to assume.
Okay.
I assume the coaches are better than the players. I bet Coach Rick in his day has been a pretty good bowler.
Oh, for sure.
To me, there's a lot of things you kind of wonder about the younger generation about. I wonder if the younger generation knows how to bowl anymore. Maybe they do, but it feels like when I was a kid, when you went bowling, you went to a bowling alley. Like now you go to a mini amusement park. And I feel like we've made, Connor talked about somebody being soft earlier. I feel like bowlers have gotten soft because now it's cosmic bowling. The lights are off. Everything's, got music videos playing and, there's all kinds of dress up around bowling. When I was a kid, you went to the Brunswick lanes. This was bowling. And all there was bowling and there was a bar and that's all there was. And I feel like that cultivated sort of a better class of bowlers than exists now. So I have my suspicions about whether or not these younger guys are going to be too good at bowling because they grew up where they bring the little mechanical sort of bumpers to keep it from going in the alley. In my generation, if you rolled a gutter ball, that thing's going right down the gutter, and it made you tough. I'm not quite so sure these young players today have been through enough of that yet.
I'm so glad that you say that, Brandon. I really am so glad that you say that because I'm not sure if he's going to be there, but if I had to pick a player, and this is because we're from the same hometown, so I'm going to give you some context. I am from the beautiful city of Rome, known for its great downtown, Berry College, Friday Night Lights feel. But growing up in Rome, we had a movie theater and a bowling alley. Yeah. And I could not sit still long enough to watch a movie in a movie theater. So we went to the bowling alley. It wasn't some fancy Bolero bowling alley. We just had the bowling alley. And you know what? I have to say, one of my greatest strengths now is that I'm a pretty good bowler.
Okay.
I know. And
That's good
that's
to
why
hear.
I'm excited to come out on Wednesday night.
But you're also a pitcher in softball, so you've kind of got the underhanded
I just
motion down.
can't teach talent, Brandon. That's what I'm getting at here.
Fair
So
enough.
because of that, I hope my man Tate Ratledge is there. He's from Rome. I know he understands what I'm saying. When you've got the bowling alley, you've got the movie theater, you've got the Steak and Shake parking lot on a good night
Yeah.
if the cops don't show up. So I know that man's got a good bowling arm too. I know he's gonna. If I had to put my money on anybody to bowl a great game, it would be Tate Ratledge. But just an awesome event. I know you got the chance to talk to Coach Rick this morning on the Dog Nation Daily Call, and you're going to be hosting that event. What's the thing that you're looking forward to most about it?
Well, let me just say this on a less serious note before we get to that. We're obviously doing this day a little bit different than sometimes we do. We're actually streaming this on Twitch as a way of just to kind of get the show recorded. And so we got UGA Jesse James watching the show right now. This is not an announced live show. We just happen to be on Twitch. So I want to shout out UGA Jesse James, who's checking us out here on Twitch. Everybody else will see us on all the other platforms a little bit later on. But I do want to shout a live viewer out here on Twitch. We're not supposed to be live right now.
No, don't give us away.
Yeah, it just happens to be that we are. So UGA Jesse James found us. So I'll give a quick shout out to him there on that. But yeah, I mean, honestly, I love Coach Rick. I really do. And I've got so much respect for him. And I think a lot of us, just to be completely honest, were just devastated when we heard that a man like this, who we've had such great affection for, that he's actually going through Parkinson's disease, because I think we know how challenging of a disease that can be. And to see the inspiring way in which he's kind of fought this the exact same way you think that he would. And obviously, this event coming up next Wednesday is not only raising money for Parkinson's research, but also Crohn's disease there as well. He's got a granddaughter who deals with that. And Coach Rick has said, hey, we want this event to be fun. The Georgia football team's a part of this. There are a lot of donors who have a chance to be a part of this there as well. We want this to be a great experience. People are going to get a chance to watch it here in the Dog Nation video and get a chance to kind of be a part of that and help raise some money for that there too. But it's the combination of what's going to be a really fun event with also the desire to help rally around Coach Rick and his family as they raise money for an important cause. They have a big, ambitious goal, $750,000, which seems like they're well on their way to being able to do that. So I'm personally thrilled to be a part of it. It's one of the great honors of mine to be asked to be included in this. I can promise you that. And just can't wait to raise money for a great cause, but also kind of watch these players during an off week have a little bit of a relaxed, vibe and enjoy that. I'm really looking forward to it.
I am too, especially because, at least for me now, being, once you're an athlete, you've always got that athlete in you. And for anything competitive, that's right up your alley. So I know a lot of these guys are going to be getting after it. I'm excited to see who can roll the ball straight, because like you said, now we've got the bumper. So sometimes it's like one big participation trophy. We're going to see who's got it, who's got what it takes, but also knowing that we're doing it for a great cause makes it all the more worth it. And so really excited to be a part of that event with you guys. And it's so
Well,
great.
plus, if you're really skilled, it's not the straight roll anyway, right? It's
No,
kind of like the spin roll, right?
like a wrist. Yeah. I don't know if Charlie at home has a Wii, but like on Wii bowling, that's the trick too. You've got to spin it.
Good point.
So I don't know if Connor's going to come back or not. I hope I didn't hurt his feelings too bad. We're going to try to get him back on here in a minute. But I do want to turn our attention to Vanderbilt for next weekend. I was having a conversation with a friend the other night, and Vanderbilt kind of feels like the lone wolf of the SEC, not just the SEC East, but the SEC as a whole. Very prestigious, high academic school, and there are some other high academic schools within the SEC, but Vanderbilt almost feels like it's in a league of its own. How competitive do we think that Vanderbilt would be if Vanderbilt was in the ACC?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly think they'd have a chance to be more competitive over there, playing a different caliber of team on a week-to-week basis. I mean, when it comes to football, I mean, they obviously have a very hard time keeping up. I mean, last year they did win 2 conference games, but in a lot of years they're not going to win any at all. And Kaylee, what I kind of find to be interesting about this too is, you know, every league kind of has its version of the sort of fancy pants, smart academic school. The ACC's probably got a couple of those. That's why maybe Vanderbilt would be a better fit in a place like that. But, like what Duke has been, they're good at football now, but obviously historically they have not been. What Northwestern's been for the Big Ten for a long time. I think a lot of university presidents like the idea of, hey, we're going to rub elbows with these like smart people, and it's going to make us seem smarter by comparison. But we're also moving into an age in college football where, as the relationship that the team has with the school starts to feel like nothing more than sort of a glorified like licensing agreement where they're using the name, but the players are kind of there more for the compensation that they're getting. You almost wonder if school, and I hate to say it this way because a lot of people who are Georgia football fans are very proud of their UGA degrees, as they should be, but you sort of wonder if the school part of this is going to start mattering less and less as this becomes a little bit more of just true, honest pay for play for the players. And if that does happen, then where does the fancy pants academic school that doesn't contribute a whole lot to the overall value of the league, whether it be Vandy in the SEC or Northwestern, the Big Ten, or whomever else, where does that fit in the future when the academic part of this starts to mean a whole lot less than it probably does now?
I guess we can call them the token smarty pants. And so we're gonna try to get Connor back on. Well, that did not work. I think he said that he was out trying to get tickets for the Taylor Swift movie that came
There you
out. I know
go.
it's like super highly competitive to get those tickets right now. So we're going to let him get those. We know that's a massive priority in his life. But once we try to get him back in, I know he's in the room. We'll get him caught up on everything. But Brandon, I know you've been to Vanderbilt before. I have unfortunately not had the opportunity to experience that. And like, how, if you were trying to describe the game to somebody who had never been, how different is the atmosphere? Because obviously it's a quieter stadium,
Yeah.
not a massive fan base. How does that make a difference in the game? Can that actually hurt Georgia almost?
Well, I feel like years ago, it was probably worse than it is now because for some reason, like the last, like, say, 10, 15 years, Nashville, I should say, has really exploded as a destination city. And so now
Yeah,
you've got just thousands of Georgia fans that travel. I'm assuming that's going to be true again on Saturday, although tickets are a little bit harder to come by this time around because of the stadium construction that's going on there in
yeah,
Nashville. But in 2019, and we talked to Jake Fromm about this on Dog Nation Daily this week, that's the most, from a percentage standpoint, that's the largest percentage of away fans I've ever seen in anybody's stadium at any point in time. It was literally hard to find a Vanderbilt fan to
right.
begin the season here in 2019 in Nashville because of how many Georgia fans were there. So if you want to go back to early 2000s, I do feel like you had to kind of, to use the phrase that's been used by coaches before, kind of bring your own guts and find your own energy and create that for yourself because you weren't getting a lot of atmosphere in the stadium. The last couple of times that Georgia's been there, 2021, a little bit like this, 2019, definitely because it was the season opener and a game played at night, there was just such a large presence of Georgia fans that the energy was actually a little bit more in keeping with a real football game. So historically, it has always been challenging to kind of find your energy at a place like Vandy. But now that Nashville is such a hot weekend destination and people like that excuse to go to Broadway and enjoy that kind of stuff, all of a sudden there are enough Georgia fans there now that the environment and the atmosphere is actually not probably as big a problem as it perhaps used to be in the past.
And as always, we have to give a shout out to the Dog Nation Happy Hour sponsor, which is Marlowe's Tavern. I know my man Brandon Adams is just as big a fan as I am. Brandon, you had the opportunity to go 2 weeks ago. Tell us what you had. What were the vibes like?
The vibes were outstanding. I was actually at the Avalon location, and I had
Right.
French dip sub, which I love. Get the cheese, you dip it in the au jus. To me, here's where Marlowe's Tavern, I feel like, really takes it up a notch. Underrated in the French fry game. I just
Oh,
see.
yes.
I'm kind of a very sort of, and this, basic type person. I'm not too fancy. Marlowe's has lots of chef inspired food, but I typically kind of veered towards the more standard options for the most part. I love a good Marlowe's French fry. And I had a great lunch. Hung out with our friends from Meriwether and Tharp there, and our buddy BJ from Dog Nation was there. We just had a great lunch and a great time. It was as good as it ever was, and makes me hungry to enjoy some Marlowe's Tavern again right now, just thinking about it.
So I don't know about you. Are you? I know you're a very simple man when it
Mhm.
comes to eating out and things like that. Are you a sauce person? Do you have sauce that
So
you?
I dip the French dip in the au jus, and
Yes,
then I like a little barbecue sauce for my fries. So,
that
like,
makes
I'm not a big ketchup guy. I don't like mustard mayonnaise at all. So I'll do like a little barbecue sauce for the fries, a little au jus for the French dip. If I get like the regular burger, what they call like the Royale with cheese, I'll
mm,
put a little barbecue sauce on that sometimes. I like that. My favorite appetizer, they had a little bit of a shrimp and crab nacho. Really enjoyed that. That was
yes.
a good time. Good
Okay,
time.
we might have to link up for some Marlowe's after this. But where I was going with that is
Yeah.
I'm a big ranch person. Like I ranch with everything. That is my really the only thing. And Marlowe's has outstanding, phenomenal ranch. I always get extra when I go. But Thank you, Marlos, for allowing us to host this show in your honor. It is my absolute pleasure to have you guys as our presenting sponsors. So maybe we're going to make that happen this weekend. All right, BA. Final thoughts on this weekend. We've got Vanderbilt. Then you and I are going to be at the High School Football Hall of Fame next Saturday. We're going to get to see Mike Bobo get inducted. It's going to be an awesome time. But for those watching at home, what's your final thoughts on this game with Vandy? If you could tell them one thing that you would want them to know, what would it be?
Well, I think that first of all, Vanderbilt's nowhere near as good this year as they were a year ago, and I say that knowing that Vanderbilt wasn't very good last year either. But they did win twice in SEC play, won a handful of non-conference games this year. They've already lost at UNLV. They're not even close to earning a win in SEC play. So a lot of this kind of comes down to how bad does Georgia want it to be? Is Georgia still motivated to blow out Vanderbilt because of what some people view as sort of bad blood dating back to the cancellations in 2020? Perhaps that's the case. But Georgia also has a little bit of a history of going into a bye week, not pushing the gas any more than they have to. There's been kind of a long history of that under Kirby Smart. And so, perhaps this is one of those games in which Georgia's just looking forward to having a week off, resting up players more for what legitimately is going to be a pretty interesting stretch. Florida, Missouri, maybe sneaky tough, especially depending on how both those, teams play in kind of big tests on Saturday on the road against Kentucky and South Carolina respectively. Then you got ranked games like Ole Miss and Tennessee after that. Georgia knows it's got a big stretch run coming up, so perhaps it wants to show enough to get the convincing win, the comfortable win, and maybe start to get guys rest early after that. I think that Georgia, if it was to admit, is probably a lot more interested in its bye week next Saturday, its off week next Saturday, than it is in its game against Vanderbilt this Saturday. But Vandy's probably still not quite good enough to lift a finger to stop anything that Georgia has going on.
Well, I think that is some really good insight. And Brandon, it's been so awesome to have you back on the show. We've missed your face. And if you couldn't get enough of the Kaylee Brandon duo, you can watch us tomorrow night on the Peachtree Sports Network, North Paulding versus Harrison. And then we'll have another guy in there whose last name also happens to be Mansell. He's just a little less cool. So if you can't get enough, join us tomorrow. But Brandon, thank you so much for joining me. Connor is headed to a wedding, so we're going to cut him some slack on this one. But guys, it is almost game day. Go ahead and start doing your pregame now. Get all your last-minute things out of the way. I'm having my Brock Bowers jersey dry cleaned. A lot in store this weekend. So we wish you all a happy Thursday. Enjoy your Friday, and we will see you on Saturday for early kickoff. But as always, thank you guys for joining, and go Dogs.